In 1929, Jesse Livermore made $100 million from the stock market crash, an amount worth nearly $2 billion today. At that moment, he was richer than J.P. Morgan, the most powerful banker on Wall Street and in America. Yet despite reaching such unimaginable heights, Livermore would go on to lose it all, not once, but 3 times. They called him the Great Bear of Wall Street. A self-taught trader who rose from poverty, mastered the markets long before computers, and left behind lessons that still shape modern investing. But his life was also a tragedy, a relentless cycle of booms, busts, and broken dreams. Today, we'll dive into the rise, fall, and enduring legacy of Jesse Livermore.
Part 1. A Childhood of Poverty and the First Steps into Trading. Jesse Lauriston Livermore was born in 1877 in the small town of Shrewsbury, Massachusetts. His family was poor, surviving on the hard labor of farming. His father, a strict man, believed Jesse's future should be tied to the soil, working long days in the fields, just as generations before him had done. But Jesse's mother saw something different in him. She encouraged her son's education and quietly resisted her husband's demands to keep Jesse on the farm. That decision would change his life forever. At just 14 years old, Jesse left the farm and moved to Boston, where he found a job at Payne Weber, a stock brokerage. His task was simple: to chalk the ever-changing stock prices on a giant board for customers to see. For most boys, it would have been monotonous work, but for Jesse, it became a classroom. Day after day, he copied numbers from the ticker tape onto the board. Fascinated, he began keeping a secret notebook, recording price movements and studying how stocks reacted to buying and selling pressure. He was beginning to see that behind every number there was human emotion, fear, greed, and hope.
By the time he was 15, Jesse had saved a few dollars and decided to test his observations in the real world. He walked into a bucket shop, a gambling parlor where people bet on stock price movements without ever owning shares. With less than $5 in hand, Jesse placed his first trades using the patterns he had studied. The results were extraordinary. He turned that $5 into $1,000, a fortune for a teenager in the 1890s. Word quickly spread about the boy who could consistently outsmart the bucket shops. By the age of 20, Jesse had become a legend in Boston's trading circles. They called him the Boy Plunger, a fearless young speculator who could turn pennies into fortunes. Years later, Livermore would reflect, "The game taught me the game, and it didn't spare me the rod while teaching." It was a harsh education, but it forged the instinct that would make Jesse Livermore one of the most famous traders in history.
Part 2. Legendary Speculations and Massive Wins. Jesse Livermore's rise was fueled by a string of daring and brilliantly timed trades. Each one added to his reputation as one of the sharpest speculators on Wall Street. 1906. The San Francisco Earthquake Trade. In April 1906, disaster struck San Francisco. The great earthquake left the city in ruins, and Livermore immediately grasped what others overlooked. Insurance companies would be crushed by massive claims, and railroads tied to the city would suffer. He placed a bold short position in Union Pacific, then trading near $180 a share. Within days, the stock collapsed. Livermore walked away with over $250,000 in profit, the equivalent of several million dollars today. It was one of his great victories, and it proved that he could see opportunities where others only saw chaos. 1907. The Panic of 1907. The very next year, Wall Street descended into turmoil. A wave of bank runs triggered a financial panic, sending stocks into free fall. While most traders were wiped out, Livermore once again went against the crowd. He shorted the market aggressively.
When the dust settled, he had made $1 million, an extraordinary sum in 1907, worth roughly $30 million today. His trades were so powerful that even J.P. Morgan, the titan of American finance, took notice. Fearing that continued short selling would completely destroy confidence in the system, Morgan personally asked Livermore to stop. Jesse complied, covering his shorts, and, in doing so, helped stabilize the market.
At just 30 years old, he had become a Wall Street legend. 1929, the Great Crash. But it was in 1929 that Livermore made the trade that would define his career. For most of the decade, the U.S. stock market had surged to dizzying heights. The public believed stocks could only go higher. Millionaires were made overnight, and speculation was rampant. Livermore, however, saw the danger. Quietly, he built massive short positions, preparing for the inevitable collapse. When the crash came in October, the market imploded. Fortunes vanished, banks failed, and panic gripped the nation. While millions lost everything, Jesse Livermore walked away with an estimated $100 million, the largest fortune of his life, equal to nearly $2 billion today. Newspapers hailed him as the Great Bear of Wall Street. At his peak, Jesse Livermore stood among the richest men in America, proof that timing, discipline, and courage could make or break entire empires. Part 3. Failures, Bankruptcies, and Personal Tragedy. For all his brilliance, Jesse Livermore's career was marked not only by spectacular victories, but devastating failures. As quickly as he built fortunes, he lost them, sometimes in a matter of days. Over his lifetime, he went bankrupt not once, not twice, but 3 separate times. First bankruptcy, the Northern Pacific fiasco. At the dawn of the 20th century, the American railroad industry was the backbone of the economy and a battlefield for the nation's wealthiest financiers. Among them were titans like James J. Hill and Edward Harriman, who fought for control of the Northern Pacific Railway. Jesse Livermore, then still in his 20s, saw Northern Pacific trading at lofty levels and believed the stock was ripe for a fall. Convinced it was overvalued, he built an enormous short position, betting the price would collapse. But Jesse didn't realize he was stepping into the middle of a financial war between Wall Street's most powerful barons. Hill and Harriman secretly accumulated shares in a brutal fight for dominance. As both sides cornered the market, demand for Northern Pacific shares skyrocketed. On May 9, 1901, the unthinkable happened. Northern Pacific stock soared from around $150 to over $1,000 in a single day. Panic spread across Wall Street. Short sellers scrambled to cover, but there simply weren't enough shares available. It became one of the most infamous short squeezes in history. Caught in the crossfire, Livermore was forced to cover his position at catastrophic losses. Virtually overnight, his fortune evaporated. The young man who had once turned $5 into thousands was humbled by forces far greater than himself. This was Jesse Livermore's first bankruptcy, a brutal reminder that no matter how skilled a trader might be, going against the giants of Wall Street could be financial suicide. Second bankruptcy, the cotton trade disaster. In 1908, just a year after walking away from the panic of 1907 with more than $1 million in profits, Jesse Livermore faced one of the worst setbacks of his career. For years, he had lived by his golden rule, never take tips, trade only on what you see. His discipline and independent analysis had made him a legend, but that year, he broke his own rule. Livermore was approached by Percy Thomas, a powerful speculator, often called the Cotton King. Price was deeply connected in the cotton market and convinced Livermore to take a massive long position. He told Jesse that prices were destined to soar, and coming from a man of Price's stature, the tip seemed impossible to ignore. At first, it looked like another stroke of genius. Cotton prices moved in his favor, and Livermore believed he was on the right side of the trade. But the market suddenly turned. Behind the scenes, Price and other insiders were manipulating positions far more aggressively than Jesse realized. When they reversed course, the cotton market collapsed. Livermore was devastated. Almost 100% of his fortune vanished in a matter of weeks. The man who had just risen to the top of Wall Street after 1907 now found himself nearly ruined in 1908. It wasn't just financial loss, it was humiliation. Livermore knew he had betrayed his own method. Instead of relying on his tape-reading skills, he trusted a tip, and that mistake nearly destroyed him. This second bankruptcy was a harsh reminder. Even the greatest traders can fail the moment they abandon their discipline.
Third bankruptcy after the Great Crash. Jesse Livermore's triumph in 1929 should have secured him a place among the wealthiest men in America forever. While the rest of the nation sank into the Great Depression, Livermore walked away with an estimated $100 million, a fortune that would be worth billions today. Newspapers hailed him as the Great Bear of Wall Street, and in that moment he stood taller than nearly any other financier of his age. But wealth earned in the market is rarely permanent, especially for a man like Jesse. Flush with confidence after his legendary victory, he began to push harder. He expanded aggressively into commodities, wheat, corn, and cotton, markets far more volatile than the stocks he had once mastered. He borrowed heavily, using leverage to multiply his bets. At the same time, the rules of the game were changing. In the wake of the 1929 crash, public outrage against speculators was immense. The newly created Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, founded in 1934, introduced sweeping regulations that restricted short selling and imposed strict oversight on trading practices. Livermore's tape-reading methods, which had given him an edge for decades, no longer worked the way they once had.
Unable to adapt, he stumbles badly. His attempts to corner positions in wheat and cotton collapsed as prices moved violently against him. His bets in corn and other agricultural commodities added to the losses. Each failed trade chipped away at the fortune he had built, and the debts piled up. By the late 1930s, the man who had once been richer than J.P. Morgan found himself bankrupt again. This third bankruptcy was not just financial ruin, it was the unraveling of his legend. The world remembered him as the man who made $100 million in a single crash. But in reality, Jesse Livermore ended the decade as a shadow of his former self, trapped between past glory and present despair. Personal decline. Jesse Livermore's collapse was not only financial, it was profoundly personal. The man once splashed across the front pages of every major newspaper was now haunted by the weight of his own failures. His private life mirrored the same turbulence as his trading career. Livermore married 3 times, and each union was marked by conflict and instability. His first marriage ended quietly in divorce. His second wife, Dorothy, a glamorous Ziegfeld showgirl, brought both excitement and chaos into his life. Their relationship was volatile. Lavish spending, public arguments, and scandal after scandal made them fixtures of gossip columns as much as society pages. Even his children could not escape the turmoil, burdened by a father whose genius was inseparable from his volatility. By the late 1930s, depression had consumed him. The staggering market losses, combined with the breakdown of his personal relationships, left him increasingly isolated. In 1940, he tried to reclaim a sense of purpose by publishing How to Trade in Stocks, hoping to pass on his hard-earned lessons to a new generation. Yet the book, while valuable, stood in painful contrast to his own unraveling life. The man who once seemed invincible on Wall Street had lost not only his fortune, but also his confidence. On November 28, 1940, At the age of 63, Jesse Livermore checked into the Sherry Netherland Hotel in New York City. Alone in his room, he wrote a final note to his third wife, Harriet. In it, he confessed, "My life has been a failure. I have had few difficulties, many misfortunes, great troubles, but it has all been my own fault." Moments later, he ended his life with a revolver. The same man who once outsmarted Wall Street and built a fortune greater than J.P. Morgan's died penniless and broken, leaving behind one of the most tragic legacies in financial history.
Part 4. Lessons and Legacy. Despite his tragic end, Jesse Livermore's shadow still looms large over Wall Street. His life was a cautionary tale of both brilliance and self-destruction, but his insights into markets remain timeless. In 1940, just months before his death, Livermore published How to Trade in Stocks. In it, he attempted to distill decades of experience, his principles of cutting losses, pyramiding into winners, and the discipline required to survive. Though the book received little attention at the time, it later became a classic, studied by traders who searched for the wisdom behind the man's turbulent career. But the book that truly immortalized him was not his own. In 1923, journalist Edwin Lefebvre wrote Reminiscences of a Stock Operator, a semi-biographical novel based on Livermore's life. Nearly a century later, it is still regarded as one of the greatest books ever written on trading psychology and market speculation. Many professional traders, even today, call it their Bible. Livermore's methods seemed deceptively simple, yet were brutally hard to follow. He believed the first duty of any trader was to cut losses quickly, because, as he once said, "The game taught me the game," and it didn't spare the rod while teaching. Losses were the tuition one had to pay to stay in the markets. Equally important was the discipline to let profits run. Too many traders, he warned, snatched at small gains and abandoned their winners too soon. Livermore rode trends for as long as the market allowed, squeezing every last dollar out of them. He also distrusted tips and rumors. The cotton disaster, where he broke his own rule and followed another man's advice, nearly destroyed him. For Livermore, survival meant relying only on his own judgment. But perhaps his greatest lesson was psychological. Control your emotions. Fear and greed, he said, ruined more traders than faulty analysis ever could. That's why patience was central to his philosophy. Sometimes the hardest trade, and the right one, was to sit still and do nothing at all. Even today, legendary traders acknowledge Jesse Livermore's influence. Paul Tudor Jones has called Reminiscences of a Stock Operator a timeless classic, one of the few trading books every investor should read. Mark Minervini, U.S. investing champion and author of Trade Like a Stock Market Wizard, often references Livermore's discipline and trend-following style. From day traders to billion-dollar fund managers, the echoes of Livermore's rules remain alive in every chart, every trade, and every disciplined decision to cut a loss or hold a winner. Jesse Livermore may have died in despair, but his wisdom outlived him. His story reminds us that while money can vanish, lessons, when written in both triumph and failure, can become immortal.
Jesse Livermore's life was a paradox, brilliant but tragic, disciplined yet reckless, rich yet broken. He remains a legend, not just for his trades, but for the lessons that continue to guide traders nearly a century later. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon, because here we bring you the real stories behind the world's greatest investors.